I'd highly recommend viewing this episode on YouTube rather than as an audio podcast because there are many visual examples presented. Hello and welcome to the Color Mentor podcast. My name is Paul Hanrahan. I'm a colorist, originally from South Africa. Now I'm based in Taiwan. On this podcast, I'm going to be talking to people who have mentored and inspired me on my color grading journey over the years. So welcome to the show. If you'd like to learn more about color grading, you can head over to my Patreon. It's called Color Mentor at patreon.com, and it includes basic skill training all the way up to full coursework on various topics. I also offer one-on-one mentoring for those who want to refine their craft further. But without further ado, let's get on with the show. In the second part of my interview with Richard Muller, we continue to talk about his experiences on various jobs like Dark, Tribes of Europa, 1899, and Wes Anderson commercials for Mont Blanc, and the film The Phoenician Scheme. We discuss LED wall calibration for film acquisition jobs, and the many aspects of the color pipeline that need to be considered. He has advice for people who are interested in becoming D.I.T.s and entering our industry, and I ask him all about his collaboration with various other departments in the film production process, in pre-production, on-set, and in post-production. We intensively discuss the cooperation between the cinematographer, the D.I.T, and the colorist when coming up with a look for a job. You mentioned working on Chappie, and for me it was a very interesting job. You know, obviously being South African, and that Neil Blomkamp has links to South Africa, and the fact that he's got this really interesting sci-fi style. Was there anything particularly quirky or interesting or, unique about the way he worked and about his process? Because he was such a post-technical, VFX-intensive director.
You can absolutely see it on set. Neil knows exactly what he wants. He knows exactly when he's got what he wants. There were a ton of times where we'd have a single take and then he'd be like, right, got it, moving on. And everyone would turn around and go, but wait, what? Like, no, the light's not right yet. Or no, I was soft here. Or I'm not happy with the camera move. Or the actors weren't. And he was like, no, it's okay. I know what I'm using. We got it. We're moving on. Next setup. And so, he was quite brutal with it. I remember a focus puller saying, but we're soft over here. And he's like, well, live with the shame of watching it on the big screen. That was Neil's words.
Right.
So poor focus puller.
Yeah, make sure it's right next time. But yeah, I mean, of all jobs that I probably wouldn't want to have, either it's the vision mixer that you were talking about on the Wembley Stadium live concert, or it's that or it's that focus puller who just has to know the distance between that object and that object somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and he was, he's brutal with it, but at the same time, he really did know what he wanted and what he needed from a particular setup or shot, and which parts he was going to use and which parts he wasn't, and how he was going to cut it. And from a VFX side of things, I think that's massively important as well. Like, he knew what he needed to do, and it was, to this day, one of the most efficiently run VFX sets I've been on.
And that era was shooting on Alexas? I can't try to remember what year that was.
No, we were on Reds for that. I can't quite remember why. I know that it might have been budgetary. It might have been, I can't quite remember why, but we were on Red Epics for that.
Right.
I think the Alexa at that time for anamorphic would have been incredibly expensive. It would have still been the day. It would have been the sort of period of having a codex recorder on the back.
Right.
So it would have been much, much harder to do what we were doing.
Yeah.
At the volume we were doing it. I mean, we were shooting with 3 to 4 cameras on most setups, shooting quite a lot of material, shooting really fast, trying to be as lightweight as possible at the same time. There was almost a mindset that this was a low budget production. And needed to be as slim as possible.
I mean, I do like those productions where obviously there's union issues and all those things, but when you get a really small dedicated team that can just focus in and fill up the gaps, kind of the roles blur. Everyone just mucks in and helps with everything.
Well, I mean, at the same time, we had 3 cameras, full three camera teams at all times. We had like a DIT team with me, a data manager, and an on-set assistant. We had a Q-Take team separately to that. Like the right size department for that sort of setup. I would probably, if I tried to do it now, still push for an extra trainee on top of that. It was a lot for everyone to look after, lots of location moves, moving fast on set, whipping 180 degrees from one setup to the next. Lots of time the camera would be covering a 270-degree arc, if not a 360 sort of arc. And at the same time, as I said, like an incredibly efficient VFX team.
And the results, amazing, like a really well integrated main character who's full 3D. It's like really good.
Yeah, and it was all about how they took references on set and how they worked as a VFX team on set. So after every setup, we'd run like a clean plate, almost as a standard, especially Steadicam shots. We'd always have references of the robot, like, so besides Sholto being on set as an actor for the motion capture side of things, always having lighting references of an actual robot mannequin, so they had the correct reflections and the correct shapes and the correct dimensions and as a reference really to put in.
360s, shooting 360s or gray ball, silver ball, all of that?
Lots of gray ball, silver ball stuff, but in general, they were really, really fast. They used GoPros as reference cameras all over the place, all the time. So we always had, like, their team always had really good references all the way through. And it was interesting to contrast because I did Avengers just after that. We were second unit and like mainly an action unit, and watching ILM, who was triple the size in terms of the VFX team on set, also being just massively slower in comparison and taking lots of plates that probably would never be used. Whereas with Neil, we didn't shoot anything he didn't need.
Right.
And I think that was the thing, is that like the big difference of covering all your bases versus knowing what you want and only doing that makes a massive difference on your budget requirements and the speed at which you can work.
Yeah, efficiency. I thought the combined and the obviously overlap in terms of the team, they're both Netflix productions, but in terms of Tribes Europa and Dark, obviously Dark was the amazing like flagship show for a lot of things, but then the spin-off of Tribes of Europa, I mean, what other experiences do you have on that? You mentioned the onset coloring and D.I.T was quite impressive setup there.
So Tribes of Europa I only did about 5 days on. Overall. So I inherited basically some pickup shots that they shot down in Cape Town. But what was really interesting for me was to get to see how detailed their dailies pipeline was and the working relationship with the lead DIT, Stefan, who also then I believe went on to actually color the series in the end as well. So his relationship with the DP Christian was really close, and Christian trusted him massively in terms of both the look development and then letting him grade the final show. His look development side on set was very detailed. Even for a Netflix production. So I think they were doing a lot of stuff in terms of that look development that, was and like very detailed and very like careful, running a base light on set or a base light in the truck all the way through. So they had that like similar freedom to some of the other DPs I work with in terms of like being able to go back and rework stuff and sort of run that consistency and have that library. Because I mean, like, one of the things as well that's really interesting with Baselight and Daylight as well, and I have a DP who insists I work with Daylight when I work with him, is that it's really, really good as a referencing library throughout the length of a production in a way that a lot of other software struggles to meet. While it's complex to learn and the learning curve is incredibly steep for it, there's a lot of stuff that you almost can't do without having a mentor, or it's very hard to do without having a mentor. The benefits of running it when you're trying to do that, maintain consistency across a project, is instantly obvious once you start using it. The way you can reference multiple timelines, multiple days, multiple shots, backwards and forwards really quickly doesn't kind of exist anywhere else really. The new live grade 7 alpha kind of has implemented a lot of features that come close to that and is really useful for it on set. And I think we'll see a lot of uptake of those features, like the means to build a quick gallery and review one shot against another. But Baselight and Daylight have really tuned in on that. I think more so than any of the other things. The color management and the color journey stuff is great. The tools they have for look building are really intuitive
phenomenal.
and very easy to work with. You have the advantage of they've tuned their T-log and E-gamma as an alternative to ACEs that looks really nice from the get-go. So you have all these things that are like well suited. But I think what people don't realize is that the strength of having that referencing system ready to go.
Yeah.
And being able to go, hey, what does this look like versus day one? Or what does this look like? Like, let's grab 10 different shots of a close-up on this actress. Why does this one feel different to the last 10 different scenes? And like, be able to reference really specific things very, very quickly is its strength.
And is that linking to metadata as well?
It's a whole mix. I mean, I do a lot of metadata capture on set. Yeah. So when I'm running live grade, I take note of as much as I possibly can on set. So I have references that are catalogable via the location, via character, via whatever is relevant for the story. So if the DP says to me, hey, let's look at the last time we were in the cave with Sarah, I can go to the last time we were in the cave and see which shots have Sarah in them. Boom, 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 done.
Right.
Or show me, like, which is my most common lens? Like, what lens have I used the most? Well, you used a 65mm the most, and then you've got 100mm as the second favorite.
Interesting. Wow. It's like data analytics.
Absolutely. But it's really
Don't let the
important.
producers see, because then it's going like, oh, I paid this line item is costing me this much, and you only used it 4 times.
The number of producers who say, how often has C camera played?
Right.
How much material have we shot with the third camera?
Richard, just go and roll C camera for half an hour on fucking something. Time lapse of the sky. Go. Okay, I get it. Okay, mum's the word.
Yeah. So, no, I mean, like, literally that sort of stuff does happen. Yeah. I was on a show where they were freaking out about us not starting to shoot early enough, so the camera rolled on sunrises. Right. One camera went to roll on sunrises, so that there was time code for the start of the day while everyone else got ready and lit the scene.
Well, maybe it would get used. Who knows?
So yeah, like, and you get, the thing is as well, it's like you get silly rules and silly requests sometimes from people who don't necessarily understand how a certain creative team works or want to see that creative team working in a different way. Yeah, that sort of stuff is like kind of a hot potato on set sometimes. One of the sequences I wish I could show you is that, like, what I do with those dailies grades from any production is I throw all those stills onto a timeline, and I do it in shooting order, and I do it in scene order.
Right.
And then I have one frame or one still for 2 frames for every single setup throughout the production. And suddenly you kind of have this time lapse or scene lapse running.
Right.
That gives you a sense of how consistent you are. Watch
Average.
the whole movie in 90 seconds.
Right.
And you're like, oh, hang on, like, yeah, like our framing rules all apply. Like, there's consistent framing, or there's a consistent color tone, or the exposures doing something interesting here, or yeah.
Yeah, this is really, it's like a really intelligent take on data management. You know, it's not just the data, it's what we need to extract. So I think maybe in summary, that's the important role of the D.I.T. Mm-hmm. You've got a foot in creative, just like colorists. You've got a foot in creative, you've got a foot in technical, you're translating for everyone, and then you can do these assessments and these quality controls and these checks. You know, this meta level, this higher level analysis on these 2 domains.
Oh, I like that too.
Cool. Coming from post and then moving on set, it's always a feel like, oh, this is a bit like the military. You know, on set has its world, it has its rules, has its thing, you know, and it takes time for you to you know, be useful, not get in the way, and fit into that team. So yeah, I mean, lots to do. You know, much respect to what actually goes on set, because it's,
the thing is as well is like one person doing their job badly can cost someone else their job. There's an element of that too. Like, and I think, like with the D.I.T, like, you're also watching the rest of your team's back. You're looking after the whole production if your mindset is right.
Right.
You're not just looking after the cameraman, you're not just looking after the camera team and the focus pullers, you're looking after the production. Your responsibility is to make sure that the material's as good as it possibly can be from a technical viewpoint.
Yeah.
You're also there to save production money. And if you're not there to save production money, production will notice and they'll cut into it. And I think a lot of D.I.T.s have a bad reputation for being needlessly expensive or carrying too much equipment.
Right.
I often have to fight for the equipment that I want to have on set, or I say is needed on set. And it takes time to build up that trust with production so that they know that you're not asking for things needlessly.
And there's always been that the relationship between crew having their own equipment, and that's as old as the hills. But presumably there's specific equipment that you need as a D.I.T. So you almost always have your own equipment. Is that correct?
I have for a long time. I have a D.I.T. service company that I have some business, have two business partners with down in Cape Town, and I have a lot of equipment in Germany. And at the same time, I almost would prefer a lot of my discussions to have absolutely no hands-on ownership of any of the stuff. Half the reason it's there is there is a platform and a vehicle to be able to do the jobs, because a lot of rental houses don't carry enough or the specifics or the layout you want.
Or up to date or whatever. Yeah.
Or up to date. It's very hard. It's very expensive to maintain a sort of fleet of D.I.T. equipment and keep it regular enough and keep it up to date enough and have all the right things to cover for all the different types of jobs and DPs that you might have to work with. If you're only going to work on one HDR show every month, a month a year, why carry an HDR monitor with you?
Right.
They're incredibly expensive. And you get a lot of requests from production saying, hey, can't you just have a flat price so it's the same every time?
Right.
And the answer is yeah, but then my flat price would be really high if I wasn't tailoring it for your shoot. Sure, I could do that, but that means I have to buy a really expensive computer and put a really expensive computer onto a shoot that doesn't need it. And the same for the monitor, and the same for the size of the cart. And so I've had a really good working relationship with a company called Cinearc in the UK.
Right.
And I can just put out an email with them saying, hey guys, I need the following. I need a lightweight cart for these days that can go over rough terrain. I need a studio cart for these days. These days I need these video transmitters. These days we'll need fiber. These days we'll only need Teradex. And on these few days here with the crane, I need remote control for the camera settings. And they'll just spec it out and supply it to production. And at least that way, there's no argument about me putting things I don't need on the shoot or things that I'm just trying to cover the cost of myself.
Right.
And it's a really nice way to work. But there are not a lot of these companies around. I've had shoots. I had a shoot in Spain where I was working with the same team I'd worked with in the UK. The Spanish production and Spanish crew couldn't supply me with the equipment I needed to match up. There are D.I.T.s who have great equipment in Spain, but it's their equipment.
Right.
And not necessarily able to go out as a dry hire to a foreigner coming in on foreign teams. So it was much harder there to source the same stuff that I could pick up, literally walk in, take off the shelf, put on a cart and walk out the same day with in the UK.
I was chatting to a D.I.T. here, and obviously the D.I.T. have now, because of how far they're getting into the Pomfret Live Grade and Resolve and Basslight and Scratch and all that stuff. It's like you got the same problem as we have with wanting to buy more and more equipment. It's basically you've got a little post facility there rolling around on a cart and a good monitor. And it's $50,000 before you blinked, if you're going to have this whole thing all up to date and whatever.
I would say a good D.I.T. setup is easily in the starting region of about €85,000.
Okay, there we go.
To cover for what you might have to deal with.
Right.
And that might be that price before you add a monitor into the mix. It's a lot of layout if you're fighting with production over getting $100 or $150 extra a day for equipment.
Right. Or if you're just fighting for the existence, no, we don't need you. We don't have that role in this whole team. Yeah.
And there's definitely a mindset as well. It's the same thing as going to a rental house, or when you're a DP and you have your own camera and your own lenses. It's a case of production are certainly far less skeptical about what you're asking for if you don't own it. Pure and simple. If you're not making a profit off it, if it's purely for the project,
right,
then there's an honesty to that I really actually appreciate.
Is there anything more you wanted to add on virtual productions? I mean, we've skimmed past it. We haven't really discussed it directly, but how does the role of the D.I.T change once you're in that virtual studio? I mean, I know from my perspective, it's all chaos. It's all, it's still a new burgeoning technology. We slowly, these calibration systems are slowly coming online. The one we didn't mention was the image sequence probe from Color Space. But yeah, the whole pipeline, the fact that post is live now. You're an element of post. You're representing the 2D editorial color post. Also, there's now the 3D post people coming in terms of that they're inside the Unreal Engine, and all of that's colliding in one moment to make a seamless comp on set.
It comes back to, first of all, you need to read the manual. And I find that the D.I.T in a virtual production environment very much quickly becomes the translator for production between a bunch of different elements, much the same way they were the person reading the camera manual and saying, right, well, this is what this means and this is what we have to do here. You're also potentially the person talking to the VFX team, the Unreal team, in terms of saying, right, this is what the camera's seeing and doing. What we need from you is X so that we get Y. And doing that in a way that might not reference stops as a language for exposure, or might not reference color temperature in Kelvin, but in other values, and understanding how those systems deal with color translations and color transforms. And it helps that I know Unreal massively. I understand how Unreal works, and I understand how the color space works and what the limitations are and what the advantages are. And it kind of goes the same way with other software. I use Resolve to run wall playback often, and I use Resolve because color transforms are really easy with Resolve.
Yeah. You mean 2D elements?
Yeah,
footage.
2D elements and plates.
Right.
And then I use Scratch a lot for projection mapping, but Scratch doesn't have the color transform control that Resolve has.
Right.
So you're immediately into the space of needing to make LUTs to deal with color transforms and the tone mapping you want in Scratch. You've got to have the time and the space to do that and test those LUTs. And I'm always nervous when working with LUTs that I've had to make from scratch just for the purpose of color transforms. And so you start to have to be really careful. And I think the big thing with virtual production, the big difference with virtual production of any kind, is production doesn't realize how much more time you need in prep. And that's in general for production. And you'll see lots of virtual production supervisors and DPs talk about how much more important the prep is. But it easily doubles my prep time having a VP shoot.
Right. The few that I've been involved in, it seems that the part that feels like a bit of a void and a disconnect is we have people who understand what's going on in Unreal, and they may or may not understand the OCIO ability to put LUTs and things on the end of that. Then the gray area comes, and then, okay, it's coming as light out on the wall. But this whole what Brompton can and can't do, and sometimes Brompton is actually limiting the signal or controlling your peak net value or doing all sorts of stuff. So there's a lot of links in the chain, and it harkens back to we need an engineer who understands this whole pipeline. Yeah. And those people the level of production I'm involved in, they just don't exist.
I made a joke. I brought a D.I.T colleague of mine over for a project recently and had him running my wall playback and wall operating. And we immediately, someone phoned and asked how he was yesterday. And I said, well, I think I've sent him back to Cape Town to convalesce for the next 2 weeks after the deep dive into color science I just gave him. And it's exactly that. Like your understanding of color science is pushed really hard inside of a virtual production space because there are so many places where it can break and fall apart.
Yeah.
And you don't know if those breaks are bugs. You don't know necessarily if those breaks are whether it's something early in the chain that's causing it to break or something later in the chain that's causing it to break. And everything has to line up perfectly. and in order for it to work. And sure, so your wall color space has to function properly. Your processor has to be set to the correct video range, as well as have the correct color space applied to it. Where you apply your translation LUT to optimize the wall is really important. Mm-hmm. You've got the content that has a color space applied to it. So often what happens with virtual production projects in Unreal, for example, is that they're not well color managed at the start when they're being built in Unreal.
Yes.
And so I run into this in that the VFX house comes and they've supplied a project for us to put up on the wall. And because the elements within that project haven't been color managed from the beginning.
You mean textures, the textures they've chosen?
The textures inside Unreal are not necessarily correctly tone mapped. So you have textures that are sRGB, some of them are Adobe RGB, and they haven't been pre-converted.
Right.
So they've loaded up a bunch of textures, and it's fine because they're not using, on their side, they're not using any color management. They're looking at an sRGB monitor. They're looking at the material loaded up in a non-color managed project. They're loading it up and they're making it look right and they're going.
Change the situation, it's all wrong.
Absolutely. You walk into the volume and you say, right, let's make this now a color managed project so that we can step up from sRGB to Rec 2020 on the wall and apply the contrast we want for the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And then apply a camera calibration that's based on those elements. But because all the textures aren't color managed to begin with, suddenly the wall of one building blows out and clips and goes weird colors. Or the lights clip. If you've got a bunch of Adobe RGB files in there as textures, then there isn't necessarily anything you can do except go back into Photoshop and then re-export them as sRGB because there's no Adobe to sRGB to something else transform inside the Unreal.
Right.
So you've got... And now, because you've done that, and they've already applied a layer of correction inside the Unreal, it doesn't look right anyway.
Yeah.
So you have all this prep time that you don't necessarily have time for. So there's been a bunch, I've been on commercials where you can't run color management on the wall, and you can't calibrate the wall for the camera because you don't have time to correct the project because they handed you the project the day before, and now you have an uncolor managed project from Unreal side. And try to explain that to post-production places making these projects. You can say it 6 weeks in advance, but they don't necessarily have the engineers who understand it themselves in terms of color management because they don't necessarily ever work with that level of color science and color management.
Well, especially if they're trusting Adobe and other dodgy things like that to do it for them. Do you ever get into a situation where you need to, I know there's something about profiling lenses. I don't understand it completely, but the lens, the characteristics of the lens have to be really well profiled sometimes to be used with a wall.
Yeah, yes and no. Okay. If your wall is really providing the distortion corrections for that lens.
Right.
In theory, yes. But I think where this would apply more is for something where you're doing virtual production outside of a volume. There's a really interesting talk that Dave Stump gives on Le Comandante, which is a film that they ran that was potentially going to be a volume shoot. And they realized very quickly that they just didn't have the budget for it to be a volume shoot because they needed to have a 70-meter long submarine as their set, not the inside, the top of, in a water tank with a volume around it. So that means 70 meters of floor space with a water tank around it, and you've got to build it high enough. So suddenly you're into this gigantic wall, and then you want to have waves and splashing and all of that sort of stuff, and LED walls and water don't go so well together.
So it's more for extension.
So what they realized was that the LED volume part of the shoot was just not really going to function. But they took a lot of LED volume technology and they went down to the harbor and they motion tracked the camera and ran a live comp in the harbor on a pontoon and realized that they could basically AI slap comp the harbor itself out and have a previs of all of their action and CGI elements and their infinite background on the ocean and the waves and bombs going off in the water next to them and planes flying overhead. They could have all of that live in camera off the Q-Take running Unreal in a truck, feeding back through and having this live comp running, like this live slap comp running. And then they could do a better comp for the dailies. The editor had all of the previs material ready for dailies, so they could edit
the backgrounds
with the previs in place.
Brilliant.
Without even using a blue screen.
Yeah.
And the only reason they were able to do that was really good camera tracking and mapping the lenses in
distortion,
extreme detail. And one of the examples they play, and they've shown it at Car Mirage a few years, they've shown it at like various conferences and Eurocine Expo and things like that. One of the things that they do is they specifically use the Cooke lenses for this. Cooke provide all the MTF detail and the scans and all the polynomic math that go for every element on every lens, so that you can plug that straight into the
virtual lens.
Create
Unreal.
the virtual lens and map it to the real one, so that as you pull focus, the distortion is exactly correct. As you pan to the edges of the lens and you change the distance, the distortion remains perfectly correct, so that when you're running that slap comp, all of the elements within it are correct and correctly mapped and correctly tracked.
Correctly, Wow, that's far out.
And I think that that sort of environment is you can only do it with that sort of level of lens mapping. And that sort of lens mapping is not a grid. It's not a lens grid. It is going back to either the manufacturer or going to Cooke and saying, hey, will you please also map our lenses to the same level. Some of the tracking systems, like the Zeiss tracking system, it only works with the Zeiss glass currently because they do the same thing. It's mapped for those lenses.
Right. This is getting more rather than less. I mean, you said we're in a mode of efficiency and trying to, I guess, the wall in its all its, things like this. They're also calling it true light. Apparently, Brompton is actually releasing their own panels now that are going to be WOLEDs. It's going to be RGB plus a white panel, plus a white pixel as well, which is quite interesting. I mean, I suppose ideally you'd want to be building the volumes bigger, getting the people standing further away from them so that you have less spill onto, so that you have this bad quality light is only the background. It's not the rim light or anything. But
I think a lot of the argument is that these big sort of tentpole productions are quite rare, and paying for a large volume is quite difficult. A large volume is very expensive to run. Just on the electricity side of things, a large volume is incredibly expensive to run.
Air conditioning.
Maintaining staff who knows how to run a large volume is very hard. I would say 90% of the volume productions I've worked on have all been much smaller scale since then, with custom bespoke walls built to exactly the size and requirements of the set. So that the camera goes 10 centimeters lower than it's spec'd for, you're going to see off the wall. Those are a better use case in many ways for volume productions because they're achievable for more budgets. If you're building a small wall and constraining yourself to using the volume where it makes the most sense, there's a lot you can do with it.
Yeah, I mean, the two cases that I've seen work well are just what's outside a window or driving shots. Either a subway train or a train or a car.
Absolutely.
I'm for those,
Trains,
but for the rest, I haven't seen much that's really convincing.
No, and the outside the window stuff is great because now you can have a boat drift past and seen on command. In relation to what the actor's saying. We had a really good use case last year where we had a fairly small, a 3.5 meter high wall by about 35 meters long. So it's quite long for a set. But the last few meters weren't for the main set. They were extra space for us to do driving shots in the same studio in a very small contained space. And then on top of that, they provided just enough room to do a medium close-up for pickups on dialogue. So from outside in the real world. So so anytime the team was out in the real world and they were pressed for time, they could shoot a wide in each direction as a bunch of plates.
Yeah.
And they could come back in and they could do pickups on the dialogue back in the volume. And all you had
That's
to do
brilliant.
was match the lighting and match the grade and match the background. They did it very incredibly cost effectively. And I think for a low budget shoot, stuff like that makes a lot of sense, especially for environments where you have limited access, where you're paying €3,000 an hour for like that section of park. So you don't want to be there longer than you need to be, or €30,000 for that section of park.
I guess for little hand close-ups and those things as well.
Yeah, pickups is a good space. You don't want to do your whole scene there, but yeah.
I helped a team do a very short little proof of concept film, and all was fine until they wanted to have an up angle. It was someone being cradled. They'd been shot and they were lying out. And the one was a down angle. That's fine, but the up angle, what do you point the camera at in a volume? It's very you can't lean the wall forward to different things.
Some volumes you can.
LED wall falls on actor. Yeah.
The argument for bespoke built spaces and setups. Look, I mean, it's still expensive. It's a luxury for a lot of productions to be able to afford an LED wall.
Right.
Sometimes you can do it in a way that saves money.
Yeah, if it's really justified by the content. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if we kind of head towards like looking to the future development, I mean, you did mention the fact that it's often hard to get a trainee, someone who's going to be you building them up to be a D.I.T. I mean, how do you see, I mean, are there initiatives that you've seen to actually develop the role of the D.I.T.? Is it very much just haphazard, people kind of slip from PA into that? I mean, do you see, like, how would you develop the role?
The UK is really good at this. Like, they're very good at it. They have a very robust trainee system. They have a lot of crew who kind of start in rental houses, and there are enough rental houses that they learn the gear in the rental houses, and they go out as part of the camera team, and they go out as part of the video team, and they go out and they have good trainee programs to help support and like make it easier for production to afford having an extra person on set. Most countries have this, but like they tend to be far more limited. And I think one of the downsides on the D.I.T. side of things is, on one side, if you look at South Africa, a lot of the skills that you need to have as a D.I.T. automatically qualify you for more money than a trainee would get in other areas. And again, this changes country to country, but I would say for Germany, for example, a lot of the people I would get as trainees don't necessarily ever want to be D.I.T.s. And I've had it a few times where the assistant that I have been allocated by production actually would rather be a camera assistant, and they want to move into camera. And because the standard progression path in Germany is for D.I.T. to become colorist, there's less motivation for these people who might make very good D.I.T.s to stay.
Yeah, it's such a specialized role that will really attract some people, repel a whole bunch of other people. So yeah, it kind of it's kind of like colorist. It needs its own development path.
Yeah, and like the UK is a lot better at this because they have a far more diverse trainee program, and you can get people in as a wireless technician on one job, and then they can be the trainee for data on the next job, and then they can be the trainee for D.I.T. assistant on set for another job, and there's a bit more space and support to allow that. And then they have a wide range of budget productions as well. So because what will often happen is that your data manager, your like senior data managers on a low budget production will come in onto a high budget production as the D.I.T. assistant, or as like a second unit person, or in shoots where you have big second units and big third units and splinter units and things like that. Those are the spaces where you're able to give people a leg up because they're supported by someone who's like the main D.I.T. who set up the workflow for a big shoot like that, who says, okay, well, you follow and tick these boxes, and then anything outside of that, just call me. Like that sort of support structure is very important because there's so much stuff that you have to learn by doing. Like I get a lot of assistants who come in and look at my paperwork requirements and go, oh no, that's crazy, I don't want to do any of that. And then will phone me 6 months later and say, yeah, I've totally adopted everything you showed me because I had to have someone else working for me as my splinter unit person. And now I needed to be able to keep track of them. So I forced them to do the same paperwork you forced me to do.
Method to the madness.
Method to the madness. Yeah. There's a really wide mix of that sort of stuff, but it's like if you only have lower budget productions that don't have space for second units, or you make the main unit guy handle all the splinter unit material, there isn't space to have a junior person kind of training, and that's like training up. Like one of my colleagues down in South Africa used to be my assistant, he used to be my trainee. And then once he was no longer my assistant on set and my trainee, I was giving him second unit work. Right. He would always be the second unit DIT. It also meant that if he ran into camera assistants who gave him trouble or production wasn't listening to him, I could step in and go, no, that this is what he needs. He has to do it this way.
Yeah.
Like it's a much longer, slower, harder process if you don't have someone with the authority to sort of fight for you and have your back.
Yeah.
Again, especially if you're in the grudge purchase position.
Right, exactly. I was going to say, like, all of this on the proviso that the market in general accepts the existence of this person. Yeah, and the need for this person.
See the mindset. You also see the mindset difference in the UK versus a lot of mainland Europe and SA in terms of, like, in the UK, I get invited to Recce's often. So production has already prepped to have me at the Recce. Yeah. Whereas the idea that the DIT would want to go to the Recce is foreign for a lot of producers.
You also mentioned camera tests and that kind of thing. I guess that speaks to what we mentioned before, the overlap between the first AC.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely the same thing. Like I go into some camera tests and the camera team expects me to have prepped the cameras for them already.
Right.
And you go into other productions where they're saying, why do you need to be at the camera test? That's a very long argument if you're already asking that question and you don't.
Right. But yeah, I mean, what I personally like to focus on is obviously the more complex situations like virtual production and the weird color science and all that kind of stuff aside, but just the basics of how do we best get a look for the story, you know, and that's what I like to focus on as much as possible. I mean, like I say, in the small markets that I operate in, there's way less penetration of this idea, and it's unfortunately on the level of, okay, DIT is going to copy the data and that's it kind of thing, going to do file copy and backups. But yeah, hopefully this can grow over time.
If I think back to 2008, the question was from insurance and production was like, what is a DIT and how long will we need to have them? Like, like when do you see them being phased out? Like, how long will this role exist for? So already the intention right back then was that the DIT was only a temporary position while everyone got used to dealing with digital.
Right.
And I think that has changed on the bigger budget productions. And at the same time, it's actually shifted more to that on the lower budget productions. Like the lower budget productions see it as, right, the camera assistants need to know the camera well enough, the DP needs to know the camera well enough that we don't need a DIT. End of story.
Right.
And post needs to know how to back up the data.
Yeah, when a card's full, it's the first AC that deals with it, right?
Not even. The second AC takes the card out and sends it to post. Done.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
And then the QTake operator can run the live QC.
Right.
You have markets that have kind of set up and prepped for that. But again, the question is, that's also up to the rest of the camera team, right? Like how much responsibility are you willing to take on, and whose responsibility does that stuff become? Is it fair to make the QTake operator do that? No, maybe it's not, but no one else is willing to take that responsibility, and so it kind of gets forced onto them. And you have a lot of QTake operators that also back up data now for those shoots where they say, no, you have to make one copy on set before you send it to post. Okay, well, fine. Let the QTake operator make that copy. They have a computer. They can do it too.
30 years back when I started, the roles were very segmented. Like an offline editor never did any onlining. You know, an online editor never did any coloring. So, yeah, I mean, we obviously are in a phase now where anyone can do everything except in very unionized positions. You know, strong industries that have strong union presence.
I wouldn't be allowed to make my own video recording if I was in a unionized space like the US. Like US D.I.T.s, there's a very strict union rule that only playback operators can provide playback and make recordings on set. You start to question, okay, well, my way of working wouldn't necessarily work so well in the US. I'd get into trouble for it very quickly.
Yeah.
We were talking about flat scans. I did find something for you that kind of drilled home that idea and need for a flat scan versus not having one.
Oh,
This guy.
that's a really good in the film look, right?
Oh yeah,
It's
absolutely. I
got
mean,
the
this is again
whole
200T.
film
You
look.
can kind of
Yep.
see it there. The wall is supposedly,
The richness of those colors.
but you can see immediately that the color chart on the left and the color chart on the right don't line up, and they really should
Right.
at this point in time. And on top of that, it's very much not a flat scan.
Yeah, yeah, that's crunchy. That's very crunchy. That's print emulation on top there, yeah.
Bingo, there is a print emulation on top. And on top of that, there are a whole bunch of things wrong with that calibration in the background because it should be the same as the color chart in the foreground. But the color chart in the foreground is really green based on the fact that that's tungsten light hitting it. And
Right.
my question back to the lab with this was, well, guys, what did you do to the stock? Well, nothing. That's just film. That's how film looks. I'm like, what have you done? What have you done in the dailies pass? Is there like, what sort of color transform did you use to get from the scan to
5213 is 200T, right?
5213 is 35 mil 200T.
Right. Okay. So yeah, they're not. I mean, maybe if they had a Fuji print LUT, then yeah, it would lend greener. Yeah, maybe.
So anyway, the point is, I never got an answer. They wouldn't
Yeah.
give me an answer. They were like, I said, yeah, but it's really green in
Yeah.
the shadows and especially like my highlights. And they're like, no, that's just your light. I'm like, what? No, sorry. I never got an answer from the lab in terms of it. So yeah, in terms of like not just having a flat scan, but in terms of like trying to like analyze material, there is like a very specific methodology that needs to go into it, and one that actually takes out these elements of what the lab is doing when you are trying to do analysis, and especially when you're trying to find a way to run color analysis on a film stock, on a film print, so that you can bring it into ACES and run something like Open VPcal on the film stock.
At least know what the parameters are. I mean, yeah.
Absolutely. I have a bunch of color patches here. Okay, I could analyze them, provided I could get the material into a workable color space. But right now, this isn't even technically Rec 709. It's kind of Rec 709 with a bit of secret sauce on top.
No, a lot of secret sauce on top. Yeah, so I mean, I find this all very interesting. I mean, I was teaching a course recently. I did a section about film curves and the different profiles and the fact that you can just go to the Kodak website now and you can check out these sensitivity curves and, you know, whether you're modeling the MTF of a particular stock. I mean, this is the reversal, the 100D reversal, or whether you know, the granularity, the sensitivity, and how, especially the spectral sensitivity. I mean, it seems like this is the whole domain you're getting into.
I want to pause you on that spectral sensitivity one there, because that particular graph has been incredibly important for me, just in terms of explaining to people why LED walls react the way they do. Because the moment you overlay that graph onto the CRI output of an LED wall, it becomes very obvious as to why the LED wall goes the colors it goes on film. Because you see immediately the overcharge and overstimulation on the red layer against the others, the cyan forming layer on negative stock.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And even though it's kind of it's not quite scientifically correct to overlay the CRI output directly onto the sensitivity without being very, very careful about what those ones, twos, and zeros mean.
Exactly, yeah.
And scaling it correctly is very, very difficult, because when you bring up the CRI output of an LED wall, now, if you can imagine, you'll see this is scaled from a relative value of 0 to 1. Okay, so you have to be able to find the correct translation of what is 0 and what is 1, and how does that relate to the film stock. So that's where you'd have to be scientifically correct. But immediately, if you imagined, for example, any exposure, because it's all exposure related, if you imagined any exposure where your 1 is on the film stock being related to be roughly halfway across this red spike, or lower potentially, immediately you'd see that like you're getting this massive, very sharp red stimulation directly across that 630 like nanometers.
Yeah, because it looks like this reversal is peaking at about, the red is peaking at about 650.
And the reversal has a very different response to the negative stock. Like it doesn't react as extremely. It still reacts. It's still like it doesn't see it as our eyes see it. It isn't nearly as strong as the negative response. And specifically the negative so-called 3200 response. What you're doing on the 3200 is you're halving the output of this blue channel and bringing the green channel down to a third of its output. So the red stays exactly where it is in relation, but these two get cut in half. Now you're overstimulating the film stock massively on the red channel.
Yeah, it just ends up looking like tomato sauce.
Ranch sauce or
okay.
like that mixture of mayonnaise and tomato together. So.
Okay. Highbrow tomato sauce. I haven't worked with the Ektachrome, but does it have the issue of being fairly high contrast, so being hard to scan?
I wouldn't say it's hard to scan. I would say that what you see is what you get when it comes to exposing it.
And if it's gone, it's gone, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Like it is high contrast as a film stock, but it's also very true to the environment you are filming.
And you were mentioning essentially to do this, you almost like designing your own IDT, right?
That is the big step here, is exactly that. In order to analyze the film stock properly, one of the first things you have to do is you have to be able to get it into something like, and again, this is very specifically for LED walls, but one of the first things you have to do is you have to get it into Open VPcal or any other sort of analysis program, and therefore you have to run color transforms.
Yeah, I mean, it just becomes a new source color space, Array White Gamut 3, Array White Gamut 4, and then this approximation to Ektachrome or approximation to 250D negative or whatever.
There are several things going on in this test. I want a real world reference here so that I can judge whether the contrast I'm seeing on the LED wall is the LED wall being correctly set or whether it's like the film response. So the first thing I do is I shoot a test where I've got a real world lighting on a human, on flowers, on the color chart. These are all reference images that are kind of relevant to the project I was about to shoot. They are snowscapes and they are very specific color tones. There's forest, there's grass, there's a very specific contrast range of very hot clouds, very deep shadows in the mountains. I want to see how that's translating onto the film stock. And because I'm trying to conserve as much film stock and shoot as little as possible, I'm only doing a few seconds or even just a few frames of each moment. And we come back to the very first one here, not calibrated at all. You can see that the wall is set to Rec 2020 ST2048, which I decided I did not like the contrast of, which is one of the results of this test. It came out too contrasty and too hard to control. So I actually moved away from running an ST2048 for this project. So it's got this like pinkiness to it on the Ektachrome versus the real world color chart.
Is this 3200 lighting or is this?
No, this is 5600 lighting because it's Ektachrome and the wall hasn't been adjusted. So the wall is still D65. So the wall is at its base neutral and its best potential output. You're getting that white balance shift.
The level of differences that you're making, it's kind of, we're just doing general ratio shifts between red, green, and blue, whether it's lighting on set or whether it's the color temperature of the wall. Or
with Ektachrome, you're going to be you would be lighting, and I mean, like we're talking 50D here, so you need a hell of a lot of light to do this indoors. So you'd be making your job very hard shooting on Ektachrome. But projects have done it. I wasn't looking at Ektachrome here because we were going to shoot on Ektachrome. I was looking at Ektachrome here because I wanted to build the IDTs for Ektachrome, and I wanted to have Ektachrome as something to compare the 200T to, the 500T to, the 250D to. Very much so with Ektachrome, like kind of the case is what you see is what you get. And Kodak were very generous. They gave me the Ektachrome stock. Cinegrill in Berlin were very generous. They've processed all of this stuff for me and have been really good about giving to me very clean passes and very clean scans with no additional secret sauce, just straight out of the scanner.
But was it hard for them? Wasn't it a bit of a it's a bit new for them because hasn't the stock just recently come out?
They're one of the few labs that can process Ektachrome. So they have a long
Okay.
history of being able to process it because it requires a totally separate bath.
Yeah.
It requires much more temperature control than the negative film stocks. So you've got to be really careful with your Ektachrome processing. But yeah, you can see the pinkiness coming through on the default. And this is the wall when it's supposed to be cooler than the reference material. And you can kind of see it coming through even in these these images over here.
Yeah.
Like I didn't have an Ektachrome calibration file, but I did have two different 250D calibrations. I put the 250D calibrations on to see how they responded, and stuff came out too green on average, although the pure whites were kind of nice. And this particular 250D calibration was built for pure white, which is great. Like it worked the way it was supposed to work on 250D and on Ecto, but the other colors came out far too green. And then the converse, where it's built for color tone, also this didn't work at all. So like it instantly proved that I have to build a calibration file for Ektachrome separate to the other two, because the default ones I had already didn't, which Ari generated 2 years ago, didn't work. And then there's that same mountainscape with no calibration at all, and you can see how much magenta is coming through. Beyond the fact that it is too contrasty.
So there's basically no way that you can do this without a test day.
We did one test where City Grill, I sent them a roll at about 10 in the morning, 10 or 11 in the morning, and I had the scans back by lunchtime.
Wow.
So they can be really fast if they need to be. In some ways, shooting with film, your turnaround can be faster than digital in some cases, which is quite amazing.
The render time, the quote unquote render time.
So then you get into how do you create the IDT for it? We have 5600 lighting, measured all at 100 ASA. Very important not to change the stop on the lens at all, because we don't want to introduce any contrast variances. You shoot off a bunch of color charts with different exposures. So 1 stop up, 2 stops up, 3 stops up. You can see how the Ektachrome's responding to just 3 stops up there.
Right.
And as mentioned, this is what you see is what you get. 4 stops up, 1 stop down, 2 stops down.
Yeah, it's all disappearing.
3 stops down. And you can see how much you're going to have to play with on Ektachrome.
So this is critical.
Getting the exposure right. Yeah. And then 4 stops down.
The light meter's definitely coming back out on this job.
Yeah, so 4 stops down and there's it's all gone. Then you're going to be throwing that into IDT Maker. You record a sequence of charts like that for any camera, any film stock. So great way of dealing with things like the DGIs, where you don't necessarily know that the color transforms match the model of the camera and the firmware of the camera that you're on. Any sort of prosumer camera, again with film stock. So you're able to take those charts, shot very carefully and very controlled, same lighting, no changes on the lens, no changes to contrast, which means you have to do all of your exposure control through frame rate and shutter.
And this IDT Maker it's also open source.
It's fully open source. You extract your information from the IDT Maker. This is now for some 200T. Okay, so -1, -2, -3, -4, 0, +1, +2, +3, +4. You throw that into just a very easily recognized and ordered sort of reference bin, and then you jump over to IDT Maker, which has been released both on GitHub and ACES Academy IDT Calculator. This has been around for a while, with the idea of you can punch in whatever camera values you want and get out an IDT. But in order to get those camera values here, we load up and create these reference charts to generate a fresh IDT.
Yeah, so using Macbeth as the basis, which, I'm sure it's close enough. I mean, I'm always reminded of that thing. I think it was Dr. Poynter who said that you got to really choose your sample points carefully, because let's say you put all your sample points near skin, then you'll have great skin rendition, but everything else is, who knows, it's just a guess.
If you run those sort of 9 stops of color chart, you end up with 216 sample points, which is okay, basically. There was a Fuji paper, I think I referenced before, written in 2019, that did exactly that. They looked at 216 sample points, saying, all right, this is kind of good value to get to generate basically a 3D LUT that will let you transform from one space to the other and profile not just the film response, but what the scanner's doing.
Yeah.
That comes to the interesting part interesting part for me in terms of like how different the scanners are and how much variance the scanner throws into the mix. So here we have two different scanners of the same shot.
Right.
So there's an ARRI scan, there's a scanner T. Okay. Neither one of these is wrong. They're just different. I know people who prefer the scan T results, and I know people who prefer the ARRI scan results. This is 200T, by the way. So two different scanners. And the whole point with the IDT is to eliminate those differences. That's the whole point. And now we have the LUT from the IDT scanner. Okay, 200T, bringing it into ACES linear, and then from ACES linear, bringing it into Rec 799 2.4 gamma.
Yeah.
And now, in theory, I should have removed the scanner characteristics between these two. There's still some contrast difference, but at the same time, I don't know what was done on the scanner, because I don't know if the scanner's lifting the blacks or pulling the blacks down, or if they've given me a slightly thicker neg just to preserve detail, or I don't know how that scanner's calibrated.
Yeah, it all becomes a black box.
Absolutely.
The neg plus the processing plus, the scan, all of it.
Before I can get into analyzing the LED wall, I need to get into a totally controlled space. And the moment I do that, and I've done and I've said, okay, well, give it to me here in Cinean, but I'm going to view it in 2.4 gamma, or I'm going to export it actually just straight as ACES. I'm just going to leave that alone and export that as ACES linear and load that into OpenVPcal as something that OpenVPcal can understand. Now I can jump into my LED wall. I can jump in and I can shoot my patch sequences on the LED wall in OpenVPcal and analyze those.
Yeah, and with the slight proviso that if you're shooting on digital, your OpenVPcal turnaround time is literally the time it takes to copy a file and do color management.
Correct.
Whereas this is overnight.
Whereas there are other options here, and it's not just OpenVPcal. I think this applies like the ARRI calibration method which has a much broader patch set than OpenVPcal does by default. Yeah. There's a film-like patch set,
right?
Which is built for you creating IDTs in themselves. And here we go: tungsten lighting in the foreground, tungsten film stock, but
65 on the wall. Yeah,
65 on the wall. The 65 in itself is fine. It is slightly magenta, but it's slightly magenta. However, start to tweak that 65 down to 3200, and it goes very, very magenta. So you want to be able to get it matching the color chart in the foreground without like a magenta shift.
Ideally, we grade live, right? If this was a digital source, you could feed it live. You could
if this was digital, you grade it live and you do it by eye. Yeah.
Do you basically like have steps in all directions on green and magenta, blue to yellow, shift it around a little bit?
No. I mean, you can do that, but you'd be, it's like throwing darts at a dartboard. You'd be lucky if you hit the bullseye.
Right.
A lot of practice, you'll get better at hitting the bullseye, but no. What you like, if you want to be able to bank on it, you're going to have to basically run this through. You'd have to run it through the IDT maker. You'd have to run it through OpenVPcal.
VPcal, yeah.
And then you'd have to reshoot it to prove that the calibration worked. Right. So you'd have to take the results from those. You'd have to generate a LUT for the wall and the wall content. You'd have to reapply it, and then you'd have to reshoot that and prove that the calibration worked.
This seems like a lot of investment for one team to do. And then, like, okay, we shoot this film, we're done. Next year, maybe the same studio, but a different DIT, a different DP, a different lab. All the variables change slightly, and all of this R&D is gone. It's useless, right? You have to redo it. So, I mean, I'm wondering, where is the point in the process that you get the most bang for your buck, that you're not having to redo this stuff all the time? Is it at the labs level? Should it be the studios? The LED studios should have this stuff? No, because they don't know which camera. They don't know which camera's coming in.
No, I think the point is that everyone needs to be aware that this is what you're in for. You're in for this game of like mixing and like of trying to find the ultimate tuning for the camera. My plan with all of this is to give Kodak and give the studios and the rental houses who've helped me out shooting shooting this process access to all of my base calibrations. So they'll be great. But those calibrations are still, and those IDTs I've made are still only relevant to that stock, that wall, that setup, that lab. I mean, technically the lab's been taken out of the equation here because of the IDT maker. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the stock and the stock tolerances should be good enough to a certain extent that the calibration for the LED wall should be consistent. Of course, I need to shoot this to prove it. So the next step, of course, is going to be to go, right, how many other walls can we apply the same calibration to, and does it hold up? And then comparing the results. So like my plan is basically reshoot these tests every time I get access to a different type of LED wall in a different studio and a new batch of stock. But the 200T calibration should hold up for the 200T. The 250D calibration should hold up for the 250D to a certain extent. There are still going to be variances. So I think the idea is that if you're pressed for time and you're okay to fix the rest of the grade and your content is suitable, the base calibrations I've created will work.
They'll get you closer.
To a certain extent. They'll get you closer. They'll get you like 90% there. They're not gonna let you match a foreground element to a background element by any means. Like if you have like white snow in the foreground and you're trying to match the white snow in the background, they're not going to line up. Not off these calibrations, because I'm not like the calibration's just like it's a generic white. It's not the white of your set and your lighting, which is what you would have to create the calibration for.
Right.
You'd have to literally sit there and take a meter reading. You'd have to shoot the gray card for your set. You'd have to set that gray card as the white point for the calibration. And if you were going to match a foreground to a background element, that's actually a creative step beyond the base calibration, because also here's the next thing is how sensitive are the tools and how accurate are the calibrations on the actual lights. Like I take 2 sky panels or 2 vortexes and I point them at the same white card, or I take the same reading on them, and each light is going to have a slightly different white temperature reading on a C800, for example. So the lights themselves aren't necessarily that fine-tuned. One HMI might be slightly greener than one, like another HMI that might have a slight magenta tinge to it. Different lenses introduce different color casts to the light. So when it comes down to matching foreground and background, like those sort of differences actually make a massive difference. And I would say if you're trying to do a seamless set in a volume environment, doing it on film is going to be really, really hard. Trying to, however, create a scene outside a window or a background, or where you have like castle walls in the foreground and a valley in the background, that's fine, because you're not creating a seamless match. Getting the daylight correct outside without the magenta tinge, that'll work off just a base calibration. Like you'd be able to do that just straight, as long as there existed a base calibration for Ruby 2.3 with megapixel or with Brompton processor, because that could throw an element into this.
Yeah.
So those calibrations are going to be really tied into setups, walls, and the stock. And of course, you're not actually taking into account lenses here either. So, for example, I've shot all of my calibration tests so far on CP2s, CP3s, or master primes, because I'm trying to have as neutral a lens as possible when running these calibrations. Because what I don't want to be doing is I don't want to be calibrating out the color tones of a signature, or the color tones of a Cook, or the color tones of like any particular anamorphic lens.
The one thing is you need to be aware of any factor is like a filter. It's a filter. Yes. And now, is it a filter over everything? So like literally a filter in the camera, or changing the film stock, or changing the camera, or changing the lab, or changing the scanner. That is a filter over everything, because everything gets affected equally. Well, equally according to the SBD that lands. But then on set, if it's wall versus foreground, if it's side light versus fill light versus backlight, those are segmented. Those are segmented things in certain areas. So this, it's a very interesting.
You could make it worse. You could say, right, am I flat onto the wall, or am I 45 degrees to the wall, and has the wall's color cast changed because I'm really far off axis on the wall?
You're now way closer on average to the blue pixel.
Yeah. And you see it, like you
Yeah,
do see it on
you
some
do.
walls.
You
So
do. You were saying maybe offline in our discussion that you're saying that the MTF of the film that rolls off the very high frequencies is good for walls because you're losing the fine moire on the walls. Is that correct? Is that your experience?
you definitely lose the moiré effect of the wall, but you have other artifacts and you have other problems that pop up. So while you don't have moiré, as the wall gets more into focus, you do get a color shift, potentially, depending on how far away the wall is. So
Right.
there's a moment where if the wall comes properly into focus, it just snaps into like a redder version of itself.
Right.
There's going to be nowhere to calibrate that out. That being said, you can definitely get the wall much more in focus than you would with digital. I mean, I've had some side shots where we've shot digital for one part of a project and film for another part of the project. And the digital version immediately had moiré all over the place. And the film version had the wall beautifully sharp, or what felt beautifully sharp, even though, and we would check on things like PCAM and like the actual like focus depth chart, saying like, is the wall in focus or are we just off it? And we always made sure we would just off the wall being in focus,
Right.
because like it did make a difference. And if I jump into this one over here, okay, I go 100%, boom. You can kind of see, you start to see that there is a pattern to the wall in the background there. So
Right.
it technically should be out of focus.
Yeah.
There is no moiré. Okay.
Yeah.
It's on the, like it's outside of the depth of field in terms of focus, but there is a
Right.
pattern. Now the question is because I can see the pattern, is there a color shift I don't want at the same time? How much of that visible pattern is allowing for a color shift at the same moment?
Yeah.
And like the only way for me to prove that in this case would be to go back, shoot it again with the wall twice the distance away or 4 times the distance away and larger, and hope that and see now if there's color difference based on the same settings.
Whether it's film or video, actually what we're shooting is a light source that has bright points of light, red, green, and blue pixel clusters, and then a big space, relatively big space of black plastic. Now, what is that black plastic? It's not no light. It's the scene light. It's whatever whatever's bouncing around the room. You pull it out of focus.
But you've hit the wall. Yeah.
Yeah. When you pulling out of focus, you're essentially doing you're blurring. You're adding those two together now. So you're not just dropping the intensity of your light or pulling it out of focus. You're actually adding it together with this reflected, quote unquote, black thing.
You'll even have some lenses that exacerbate that pattern. I mean, it's like one of the things we do tests for when we test walls and digital cameras is like, is the lens going to give you an enhanced view of that grid, or is it going to turn the grid into a whole bunch of vertical lines, or is it going to smooth it all out? And there are a whole bunch of vintage lenses just based on their architecture from a particular time period. I can't remember what they are off the top of my head, but I know that we tested a whole bunch of, I think it was Cinevisions, the longest Cinevisions tended to give us a crosshatch, like a vertical patterning straight away. Like it didn't look bad, but it wasn't what you see behind me. Like it wasn't like, so if I were to pan from real world to LED backdrop, you'd immediately see the difference between the two environments.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, on productions, if you're shooting anamorphic and then converting immediately, and then everything to do with post-production is essentially flat, but just 2.4 aspect. But if you're going to stay anamorphic through your whole VFX process, I know that just puts gray hairs on everyone. That's a hell of a, over and above all this color stuff, this moiré stuff, these pixel things. Yeah, they really do compound on each other.
Yeah, they can do. Look, I mean, like the shining star here for me, of course, was very much the IDT maker. Like without the IDT maker, without the help I had from like the team behind it doing it, like this, like and getting into like being able to generate the IDTs required to do the film analysis, like it's an integral step to it.
Yeah, having a like an arm's length understanding of pretty much what you have to do versus actually having the steps in place and what to do, what to shoot, how to shoot it, how to process it, how to interpret the results, and actually spit something out, it is often a very big chasm. I mean, we haven't really touched this type of topic, but virtual studios in general are a road to automation. And we're in a big automation in all aspects of life, and obviously in many aspects of film production. So how we suck this up and how we take it on board, over and above the complexity of color science. But yeah, this automation, I don't know, what's your feeling? Does it feel generally like it will get smoother as time goes on?
I think it will get smoother as time goes on. I mean, like the whole point of me running all these tests and shooting all these different film stocks is basically to build a little guidebook that says, hey guys, if you're going to do this, this is what you're in for. Here's a starting point. Here are a bunch of calibrations that you can use to get yourself over the first hurdle, at least get yourself into something that you can look at in a gear test bay. But know that you want to have 4 days in advance to shoot the test in the gear test bay, which means you need access to the LED wall in the film camera early enough and some content. You need to get that processed. You need to shoot the proof of it still in the gear test bay. So next day or the day after, time to light that, time to have some foreground references set up, access to a calibration lens and not just the lens you want to shoot at for the project, like all these little things like that. And then you still want the prep time on the stage where you go, hey, let's now take our calibration, let's have a look at it, let's shoot another pass in the stage, ensure that the setup's 100% the same, see if that copes with whatever creative choice you've made with lighting. So for example, you've run all your calibrations in the gear test bay at 5,600 and 6,500 and 3,200, and you get to set and you take a bunch of measurements on set and you find that your key light is at 5,000 or 4,300. So now you have to match the wall to that. And if you haven't shot it in the gear test bay, you don't have the calibration ready for it. How do you cope with that creative change that's happened on set during pre-lighting?
50% of the other two mixed together.
Or you make sure you shoot a color shot for every, or you shoot a gray card for every potential color balance. I mean, the nice thing with IDT Maker is, IDT Maker, or for that matter, Open VPcal here, is that it will take a white reference. So you can give it a white reference and say, right, this is the white reference, match this. And now the wall is going to do that shift for you to whatever that white reference is. No, but I mean, you're still in this world of you're either working with OpenIO or you're working with the LUTs. And if you're working with LUTs, you really want to like kind of bash test them as carefully as you can. LUTs always leaves this, oh, what is it really doing? Sort of feeling in the back of your head. Like, is the contrast I'm seeing correct? Is like the... So the only way you can tell is by shooting it and shooting the test and then having that rush processed and having enough time to shoot that so that you're not walking into the LED studio on day one, you're walking into the LED studio 2 days before so that you have time to shoot the test, see that it works. If it doesn't work, make the fix, shoot the test again, prove that it works.
Seems only possible, and you haven't even done makeup tests, etc., etc. So, yeah, I mean, it only seems possible on longer projects where you're committing to 30 days in the studio or whatever.
I've done it on commercials, and it's definitely stressful when you're under that time pressure of trying to, I mean, we've been under the time pressure. We know we're turning over at 9 o'clock, so you've got to make sure your lab results are back by 8:30. Because
you're actually crossing a lot of roles here. But if you just put your D.I.T hat squarely back on and say, like, in this type of job, it seems like all of your typical D.I.T tools, so POMFoot and all those kind of things, actually don't play a part in this, because this is all in the realm of the film lab, the Unreal Engine, and what's coming through. In
one sense, it's very much a intensive push on your understanding of color spaces. Like if there was any sort of question about whether you did or didn't really understand how the color spaces and the color transforms between different color spaces worked, this will force you to make sure you understand them.
Right.
On the other side, like you continue to use a lot of those D.I.T tools. I definitely continue to use POMFoot where I can in terms of the color management. One of the last projects I ran, we ran all of the playback through Resolve because I needed the very careful color management control that Resolve gave me. even though it wasn't the best playback software.
Right.
I'm pretty sure I would have got better response and better control of the wall if I'd been running live effects.
Right.
But I needed the resolve color transforms without the hassle of jumping between creating LUTs for live effects, because live effects doesn't have the tone mapping control I need. It's as deep a level of like D.I.T understanding, like that you'd require for dailies, or you'd require for live grade work, or you'd require for heavy post VFX work. But at the same time, it really is a mix and a mash of all of those skills at the same, like, put together. Like it's taking everything you know as a live grading D.I.T and everything you know as a post production person, and really slamming it together and having an understanding of how the film responds and how film works is a luxury a lot of D.I.T.s don't have. I mean, like, I was lucky that I started in post production when we were still working on film.
Right.
But a lot of the younger guys don't necessarily have that exposure.
Yeah. Certain markets are only certain markets have access to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, because the stuff that we're involved in South Africa, we're doing a bunch of training. Both you and I, and in the future, we're also, bringing up the new generation. I mean, can you maybe lay some key stepping stones for what you think that someone who has interest in this D.I.T role, what are the key steppings? Is it literally just apprenticeship like it used to be? Just go and learn, make coffees for people and stay on set? Or are there specific things that you'd suggest?
I learned a hell of a lot working alongside basically just 2 or 3 other pioneer D.I.T.s. And I'm very grateful for the short amount of time I had with those guys, colorists and watching other colorists work. So whenever I get a chance, I make sure I sit in grades on projects that I've worked on, especially final grades.
Yeah, that is few and far between. Sometimes you do get DPs. DPs are there, but yeah, I mean, the gaffers would benefit a lot from coming to have a look. Everyone would benefit a lot.
Absolutely. And I'm always amazed by power windows weren't a thing when I was working as a junior colorist. Like when I started out, power windows were barely a thing. Like it was a very new idea. Tracking a power window was an absolute nightmare if you were going to put one in. So you were very careful about how you used them then versus how they get used now, which is like almost every setup has multiple in any grade. Like, sure, like we as D.I.T.s often get limited and constrained to only working with very, very simple grading tools on purpose. Like we try to keep things simple with just CDLs, CDL and a LUT, done. Like no secondaries, no complex stuff, so that we don't complicate matters for the grade later.
Yeah.
And we don't fix things that shouldn't necessarily be fixed before the editor's seen them.
It's a fine balance that you've got to strike. You want a neutral viewing platform that you can assess good from bad. You don't want to hide too many mistakes, but you also need to give an idea of what looks like a mistake but is actually easily fixable. So it's a very funny balance to try and strike.
Absolutely. And then you get the projects where the pressure is quite high. And like there's definitely like a scale of project that you get to where all that matters is that it looks good. So all of those rules go out the window, and you better have buy-in from the colorist if you're going to do that. Like, so the colorist knows that you are adding secondaries and you are adding grain and you are adding halation and that you are adding power windows and you're bringing down the outside of a vehicle and lifting up the interior and things like that, like alternatively. Like sometimes it's about like making sure it looks good for the client, regardless of whether you are hiding problems later. And that's a really delicate balance. You like if you're going to do that, you definitely have to have buy-in, and people need to know that like that's the right people need to know that that's what's happening.
Talking about look design, it's an interesting thing. It's always an interesting choice to know where to implement a change. Should this be a show LUT change? Is it only on the scene or is it only on the shot? And I think it's the same thing that on set. That, for example, if it's every single scene that has this certain key light or this type of thing, or if there could have been a general global change on set, that nudged everything in the right direction, we wouldn't have to be fixing this problem again and again and again. So I think it's the same. It's I guess filmmaking in general is those sort of things. 'Cause as much as we love grading, we love tweaking, we love twiddling the knobs, those days where you get beautiful footage and you just have to do minimal things to it, that's actually the primo job, right?
Yep. But sort of coming back to that thing in terms of what do younger technicians do to train up? I mean, spending time in the grade, I think, is like, whenever possible, is a really key component of that. Like, you have to know what people have done and have to do to your material in order to get it past the finish line.
Right.
And that helps you make a lot of decisions later on about what was worth spending time on set. Was it worth spending time matching A to B camera on set? Like, did it save the colorist time later? Yeah. Was it worth chasing the highlights on set and putting NDs on the practical lamps? Or did the color store bring it down in 10 seconds and you shouldn't have spent 5 minutes longer on set doing it? Or should you have spent 5 minutes longer on set doing it? Like those little things, like you're only going to see that when you're in the final grade, really.
Yeah.
Like how far that material gets to be worked, how much time is left to work that material. And unfortunately, a lot of guys are potentially working too much to have the time to go into final grade. I mean, like during season, or whether they have the access to, is the final grade even happening in the same country?
Right. Keeping
Keeping in contact with the DP, finding out, like speaking to DPs afterwards, saying, hey, what did you have to do in the grade? How did the grade go? Like that sort of feedback's fairly invaluable. And then the other thing is, well, is like a lot of younger guys get relegated and stuck in the back of a van.
Yeah.
And they're working off a van at base camp. They're not getting to see what's happening on set. And the first step to working on set is being able to understand how to move around on set. Trying to finish your data backups and your dailies backups while you're in an on-set environment can be very difficult. Sometimes it's not the right place to do it at all because you just have to move around too much and you're in shot too much. So data and data management has to happen in a stationary place back at base camp. But for those data managers, they need to find ways to get onto set and spend more time on set. And I often say it with like the guys who do my QC on set and do the data management is, if they're seeing something weird, come and have a look. See what's happening on set before you make the QC comment.
Right.
Because maybe that comment you're about to make about some weird lens artifact is not actually what you thought it was. And you're only going to see that if you come onto set and you see what's happening on set, like anything from a flickering light that's flickering on purpose. So like you've got to spend time on set.
For us as colorists, the key relationship to nurture is with cinematographers. Obviously directors, producers, etc., VFX supervisors, post supervisors, sure. But D.I.T.s you've got a leg in both. You've got a leg on set. So definitely it's the link through DPs. But yeah, there's a clear link to you should nurture relationships with colorists.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the ideal thing. Not that a colorist can bring you work. It's obviously the work's going to come from the production side. But yeah, once you're there, once you're in the hot seat, the fact that you have a network of resources. And you know, I mean, based on conversations that we've been having recently with certain people who are focused on coding and, you know, color science specialists and that kind of thing, you know, it really opens up a lot of potential.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose the other side of it for D.I.T.s, the trick is always like between making the jump from one type of work to another. Like making that jump from data managing to working live on set, where you get the opportunity to do that, what sort of market you're in for that. Some markets just don't have D.I.T.s on set. They only have D.I.T.s handling data in the van and generating dailies. And it's very hard to make that jump in those environments.
Could literally be at the production office. It could be an office job.
They could. And that does happen.
Yeah, you could be hired by the rental company.
Yeah. I try to get trainees whenever it's possible. I always try to have trainees because like otherwise you're just not getting fresh blood. New people aren't learning. And your trainees are often get to spend more time on set than your more senior assistants. because your more senior assistants get given like very specific tasks and specializations, and your trainees are the only guys who are actually getting to see how you interact with the DP, or what sort of conversation, get to overhear what sort of conversations you are having with the DP in the tent or at the monitor on set,
Right.
how exposure is being judged on set. Or prejudged before it's even been lit. So working as an assistant for a live DIT is I didn't get to do a lot of it, but it was really important for my understanding of, I can make that decision. I can make that call. This is an important distinction to make.
Ideally, the D.I.T.s kind of skill and trust and all that kind of stuff extends so that the DP leans on them more and more and outsources more and more. He gets to focus solely creatively. You're handling, general setting of stop or whatever.
I worked for a DIT years ago, far back as 2014-ish, 2015-ish, as his assistant on a big shoot. And one of the very first things that kind of caught my attention, I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting, is that the first time he saw the DP, he pulled out 2 light meters and he was like, here's yours, boss. I mean, they've both been matched and calibrated together. So his light meter and the DP, he had his light meter calibrated to the DP's light meter, and they were identical. And then he ran around and took light meter readings.
Yeah.
And then I contrast that to a shoot a few years later. I had to look after 4 cameras at the same time in the desert. One camera was pointing at the shadows of castle. One camera was dealing with harsh sunlight. One camera was backlit, horses coming in. And I was standing there taking spot meter readings of all of this and pulling different stops. And the focus puller came up to me. I was like, do you want to get fired? What are you doing? Because I was taking light meter readings on set. He's like, you're crazy. Like, because he fully expected the DP to fire me on day one for doing that. And was very surprised when like the DP turned around and said, no, that's what I want him to do. Because the DP was dealing with lighting and I was making sure that 4 cameras matched. Prior to getting to see what the shot was really going to be, I needed to know what all 4 cameras were going to be looking at and whether camera B needed more ND than camera A. And like, again, it's different. Like, you have to know when it's safe to do that and when it's not.
Read the room.
Yeah, absolutely. There are definitely DPs who would never see my light meter.
Okay, cool. Richard, this is definitely turning into 2 podcasts. So I've really enjoyed this tour through your world. And I'm sure there's more that we can chat about. And I hope that in future you can keep me updated with this interesting collision between virtual studios and film. I think I started out my career all on film, and I'm very keen to head back there as much as possible, and I'm really enjoying it. So let's talk more in the future, and hopefully let's share more about these wonderful projects that you're all on.
Cool. Absolutely.
So thank you for your time, and we'll chat again.
Perfect. All right.
Cool,
Thanks very much for the invite.
Cheers. Thanks again for listening to the Color Mentor podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can leave comments on Patreon or Instagram. The Instagram handle is color.mentor. And remember to head over to the Color Mentor page on patreon.com and check out the goodies there. We'll see you next time.